The most impactful people were those from the early nation of Islam who had such economic plans. They were entrepreneurs, they were small business owners, they had micro businesses, they were out there making their way. There has to be a way that we can take that entrepreneurial spirit there, the entrepreneurial spirit of the black communities before desegregation, find a way that collectively we can put the energy together that's going to make a difference. Not only are we going to be able to seek employment and have that employment happen for us in a fair and equitable manner, but get to the point where we can create employment opportunities. One of the things Sherman Jackson listed some major challenges for us. Those of you who don't know Dr. Sherman Jackson, you really need to get up on your reading. But one of the things he talks about as a major challenge is how do we manage religion in a secular democracy? And one of the things that we have to realize as a part of managing our religious identities has to be that we are not enemies, that we are best allies in a common cause for the good of everyone, not just those who look like us, but everyone in general. And if we can manage our religious identities, we would have a better chance to negotiate through life. Through this prism of liberalism, we would have a chance to negotiate how we are treated, by how we first treat each other and how we treat those outside of us. It is not my place to give out statistics that I'm unsure of, but I think I'm on solid ground when I mention this, because I've heard Muslim scholars use this before, but I think that I am correct that the largest single group of converts to Islam are black Americans. Black Americans. And brothers and sisters who are of the faith need to realize that your challenges start at the blackness, and they are exacerbated at the Muslim or Islamicness. They start at blackness, but they are exacerbated by the fact that this nation right now, under this particular leadership, does not take too kindly to Muslims. You are challenged. We are collectively challenged. We are in a situation where we must consider, how do we navigate this America in the skin we're in, dealing with the stuff we have to deal with? And with that, I want to open up the questions. Put before you, I think that I heard both of you offer us ways. One was the interpersonal relationship development. The other was a larger conversation. Either of you can speak to that for making a difference in having dialogue.
I'm just going to say something. I'm going to be real, because I think that, again, it's simple. And this is something that perhaps I'm not being objective about, because I got it from the experience with the folklore. And it's that, one, you have to be patient. And people of faith, we know that. We have to patiently persevere. We have to be patient. Because I think that these relationships develop organically. And I've been in interfaith spaces of dialogue that are very, very focused and that are project-driven, and they don't have the longevity that the ones where you really just kind of just get to know and organically start off, okay, we're strangers, but we have faith in common. And then you get to, well, I see you a lot, and so now you're maybe like my neighbor. But then you end up after 15 years where I remember telling my sons, because my sons, and I'm going to quote Imam Muhammad, they fell victim to the street. And they would be in spaces, and I was worried about them. And I told them, if you ever need something and I'm not around, or you can't get to a masjid, I said, this is where the Folklore House is. And I never in my life would have dreamed that I'd tell my sons to seek refuge at Catholic white folks' house. But it was all that patience and that organic thing. So I just think I think it's a mixture, but I think that we have to remember that we got to be strategic, but we have to just let it happen. I think that's, yeah. Mm-hmm. And open yourself up to letting it happen.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Ware?
Yeah.
I like it.
In terms of dialogue, I would describe it as like a calling, like someone is called to it, and not everybody within the church, not everybody in the mosque is actually called to this. Not everybody develops the discipline to do this. And it represents a service that someone is doing for others in the community. Why? Because once they leave from the church, once they leave from the mosque, they're going to encounter people in other settings. And for those who are at the providing leadership in the dialogue, can help people within the church or the mosque, and in that safe space, prepare them for these encounters that they will have when they're meeting other people. But I would describe it as something like a calling that not everybody does this. Mm-hmm. So if I went to a church and I wanted everybody to do this, it's not going to work. I can't draft everybody and make them do this. But there will be some individuals who will have the calling, the gifts, and the talents to do this type of work. And it's a very important work, so not all of us are given the same work to do, but this represents one of the areas of work that's very important for any religious community, and that is, how do we prepare people for encounters and relationships for those who are outside. Now, those who do sociology, they will say that if you have a group and the group closes itself off and it doesn't interact with others, they call it a cult. Mm-hmm. It turns in on itself. And people are not prepared to function in the world that we live in. Now, it would be nice if you could only have people just like yourself to deal with, but in our society, we're in constant encounters with people who are different from us. And many times people in our communities are not well prepared. They don't do very well. I was listening earlier about the personal relationships, or participating in the Christmas play, in the Christmas pageant. How there's a way to be a part of. There's a way to be a part of the world and still maintain your integrity as a believer in your own tradition. So it's not abdicating our responsibilities as being a part of our religious community, but a way that we grow. It's a way that we live and operate within the world.
Excellent. We'll open up the floor now. We have a microphone that'll go around, and we'll take some questions and move around. I think Bilal had his hand up over here, and let's start there.
First of all, thank you both for sharing. I want to ask, like Dr. Ware, a question about Dr. Sherman Jackson's book, where he engages in the thesis put out against is God like a white racist, put out by like a theologian at Yale that many Christian like theologians never responded to. And so the problem of black suffering, Dr. Sherman Jackson tried to address it from an Islamic perspective, and he brought many voices in like dialogue with that. My question to you is, as a aspiring theologian myself here at the Hartford Seminary, would it be an interest to you or an interest to have such a dialogue about such a thesis? It's not dogmatic, but it is talking about our blackness and also how our theology deals with that. How can we have interfaith dialogue at that level where we're engaging our theology and also our blackness?
Okay. That sounds like you're on the path towards dissertation. I volunteer to be on the committee. It's a very important work that needs to be done. I got a chance when I was in my early stages of study to actually have conversations with William R. Jones, who actually wrote the book, Is God White Races, and to get to know him personally and to know what his project and his goal, what he was trying to do. His project was very simple, which is that in religious communities, often, and as he was dealing with black liberation theology, that is, how are these black theologians going to talk about the problem of suffering, black people suffering? And he demonstrated that they had assumed traditional Western thinking. Only thing they did was color God, but they did not realize that the concept was still anchored and grounded within these Western categories, and it was not useful for them if they wanted to really adequately talk about the problem of suffering. So I think that it's a good project. It's an avenue that I think is very promising to go in. So as we're going to deal with these issues, these problems, to look very critically, and critically doesn't mean negative or destructive, but to take a really good, thorough examination of what is it that we believe, what is it that we teach within our religious communities, and are we doing very well when it comes to addressing the problem of suffering in our world. And I like to do a course on theodicy and give students the hard cases. What do you do with mass killing? What do you do with genocide? And how do you respond to this? Where is your God in the middle of this? And those are real hard questions that people have to answer given the type of violence that's in the United States and violence in other parts of the world. So it's I think a very important project, because some people will use the suffering as a way of denigrating religion itself, to say that there is no God or there is no profitable path that you're taking in terms of this religious devotion, because your God is not responding to the suffering that you have. And that's why Jones was very persuasive, and that many black theologians stepped back and weren't able to respond because they hadn't done a thorough investigation to look at what are the presuppositions that you have when you're doing this theological work. So everything's got to be on the table. You've got to do some very thorough study, and that thorough study is very important to addressing the problems. Another thing about Jones is that he says that when you have a system of injustice, there's social practices, it's a social institution, and there's certain ideas that buttress it and hold it up. So you not only have to attack the systemic evils, you've also got to attack the ideas that legitimate it. And so if we're going to do a very good liberation work and deal with black people suffering, we've got to attack the systemic structures, the systemic evils that are in our society, and we also have to start to deconstruct and eradicate these ideas that are forging and perpetuating these systems. Because once you change the law, there's still people that are in bondage. And we have to think about the mind, because the mind, where the mind is, the body will follow. So we've got to think on those levels in terms of the social structures as well as the ideas that perpetuate that type of injustice. But I think it's a great project, and I hope to be on the committee.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
I have a question for each of you, but I'll ask the questions and then wait for the answers afterwards. For the doctor, I was trying to understand the super-confessionalism and its difference between exegesis, if you could elaborate on that. And for Layla, I have to identify with what you're saying, in the sense that as parents, as mothers, I think that we have such an influence on the children and next generation that the things that we do with them and the things that we teach them, if we're in the right frame of mind, would make a revolutionary change. Even with all the research and all the academics, I think the mother in the home would have such a big impact. As far as black people, church, mosque, Buddhism, we're already a people. We are already a group. And I think that sometimes we don't recognize that. I'm a Muslim, I'm a Christian, I'm a Catholic, but we are still the descendants of the slaves that were brought over here. And I think if we remember that and we build on the fact that we are one people, we may have a different flavor of cake, we might have, like I said, a different religion, but we can come together on what we are and stand on that. In our interactions. Our families are different religions. I mean, we are such a unique people, and we've gotten along for so many years like that I think that we're missing something if we don't stand on what we already have.
Can I make a comment to the latter part of what you said in reference to us? I agree with you exactly what you said, but I just kind of want to phrase what you said a little different. We are unique people. We're one people. I agree with that. But when you said that we're the descendants of the slaves, I think that what really makes us this oneness is that we are no longer African. The slaves, when they came here, were Africans. And we're descendants of them, but we are new people because we are actually a mixture. We're not that. And this is why this newness is so different, because we're a new people. And so I think that if we, as African Americans, like you said, whatever faith, whatever non-faith, if we really recognize that we are a people, it makes us have black power. Because someone else can say, I know for a fact I'm Lebanese, or I know for a fact I'm Ethiopian and African. But then we get confused. What are we? And then it forces us to say we're black. But what is black? But if we say we are a new people, we are a people. So I'm agreeing with you, but I just kind of wanted to say it that way.
Okay. Answer the first part of the question.
Yeah, because she asked you a question.
Yeah, it was about supra-confessionalism.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Okay. It's worth coming to the conference because we talk about supra-confessionalism. It's something I like to emphasize and to give it a name, because when I've had courses and dealt with other people, we talk about other religions. I find many of my students who are not truly engaging another religion because it becomes watered down. It becomes amalgamated into this thing that actually, when you stand within the religion itself, it doesn't say those type of things about itself. And that's what concerns me. I don't think people can really engage one another unless they come into the dialogue truly as they are, and who they are, and what they believe. But when people come into the dialogue and they start making certain claims, and those claims that they make are imposed on other groups. Sometimes I've been in settings, and it's maybe within a Christian setting, where they do talk about the different Christian groups, and there are people that make claims about who I am and what they think I am, and they're not a part of the tradition that I stand in. So when I come into the dialogue, I have to let them know, that's not really who I am. This is what I believe, and this is what people in my church actually believe in what we do. And so it becomes a task of trying to correct people that are overreaching and making claims and imposing those on other religions, and to the degree where sometimes I notice with the students, when they're not prepared to come into the dialogue because they have no identity of who they are. They don't know their own tradition. They don't know their own scriptures. So they can't really engage other people in a dialogue because they haven't learned who they are, and they haven't sufficiently learned their own tradition. So when they're in the dialogue and other people are making these claims, they begin to assume that and take it in and internalize it without even having the benefit of study themselves. And that's when the dialogues are not helpful. It's a way of seducing people into a conversation where an identity becomes imposed on them. And so if we come into a dialogue, I think people should come in, it should be free, it should be voluntary, and no one constraining and constraining who you are and trying to shape your tradition for you. That's where I stand on that.
Right over here.
Hi, this question is for Sister Layla. I really enjoyed your talk. It was very peaceful. You mentioned that you were sixth-generation Muslim. I'm wondering what you mean, sixth generation. I think you said your great-grandmother was Peggy, or great-great-great-grandmother. Can you explain the 6 generations for me, please?
So my great-grandmother, I guess is what, Grandma Peggy, okay? So she was converted to Islam with her family, with Farad. So that's my great-grandmother. Then it's my grandparents, my father's parents. Then it's my father. No, yes, and then it's me. But then it's my children, and then it's my grandchildren. So I have 6 generations, right? Yes, and because earlier I said I have a great grandson. Now this is where I had to walk the walk and talk the talk. I had to grow to this point. When I first started doing interfaith work, and 20 years ago, and I first had my first grandchild, I distinctly remember praying and almost pleading with Allah that she be a Muslim because her mother was Christian. And by the time now, today, she has a son. She's not Muslim. She's Christian. And she's going to raise him as a Christian. And guess what? I'm happy. I really feel, I'm so proud of her. She's a good Christian girl. And that's another experience of me doing interfaith work, that it has freed me and has allowed me to see that truth is everywhere, and so I have 6 generations of Muslims in my family, but I also have 7 generations of my blood, and the 7th one, now I'm getting ready to do one of my father's number, that's the number 7, it's my grandson, and he's a Christian. No. Because what happens is they read my bio and it's different and it's worded. It's 6 generations. So I'm 6 generations. And how that came about is what you just said. And a lot of us probably can say I'm a witness to this. Because I'm African American, the first thing that happens to me and when I'm in certain settings of faith is that, oh, you must be with the Nation of Islam. That's one thing. And then the next thing is, oh, you converted. And I just get tired of it. So I said, how can I let them know I didn't convert? I mean, because not that I think one is better or not, but that's not my reality. Don't try to know me without knowing me. So that's why I make a point of having that. It's 6 generations of us. Yeah.
We're getting ready to close out. We're going to take these last 2 questions and we're going to stop. Go ahead.
Thank you for such a wonderful forum. And I just have a quick question, particularly since you mentioned don't know the tradition. And when we're talking about the Black church and the mosque, out of all respect, what came to mind was a recent paper that I did here at the school, which was Gender Inequality as it relates to women. And I'm curious if there is a comparison or the implicit bias, if you will, that one may experience in the Black church if it's also similar in the mosque as well as it relates to women being recognized, if you will, in the ministry, if that makes any sense. Or should I say it a different way?
It's good.
Yeah, there's similar challenges for women in Christian churches when it comes to equality in ordination, official recognition as being a minister, moving into higher levels of leadership in the church. And as I mentioned, as we have a dialogue, that's one of the things that we have to talk about in terms of sexuality, gender, what are the roles of men and women. And that's something that Black churches, and I don't know what goes on in the conversations in the mosque, that we have to talk about because that's impending and impacting our reality. There are things that draw people into a religious community. There's some who come in and the way that the community is structured, it may give them pride and self-esteem to see how their roles that are structured for men and for women. And then there's some persons who maybe take a perspective of freedom where they don't want to follow those norms. Maybe they want to take a different path. But whatever the case may be, is something that we have to talk about because that's the culture that we're in, and we have to really explore that in terms of what represents structure, order within the religious community that becomes affirmative and empowering for people within the religious community. And that clearly we can recognize that when there are gifts and talents that people have for leadership, that they can actually be fulfilled in that capacity when it comes to leadership. There's some churches that wrestle with it. Some churches stumble with it. Some fail in that area. And some are having some modicum of success in terms of acknowledging and recognizing and having women as equals when it comes to doing ministry. But not everybody's there, not everybody's on the same page. So if someone comes to my church, there'll be women who will exercise leadership in the congregation in the way that men will have leadership, but still we recognize that there are distinctive roles that men and women have. But when it comes to the leadership, we know that there are certain qualities and certain gifts and talents that we have to make use of and make space for people in order for the church to achieve its mission. But if I go to another Christian church, they may not do that. So it's not even across the board. Some are at different places when it comes to equality and leadership.
I would start off where you ended, that it depends on what community you're in, depends on not just, because in Islam it's such a diverse religion, so it depends on not just a race or nationality. It also depends on what interpretation or school of thought that the mosque is in. But hands down across the board, yes, there is a lot of room for growth. And yes, many times we find ourselves, not just me, because some of the younger sisters now that are very well educated and that have actually gone to Islamic schools of learning with the young men, and now they find themselves at a point of, as adults with this knowledge, but because they're not imams that are women, the girls or the women feel that they can't progress, even though they have as much knowledge as the men, because there is no pulpit, so to speak. There is no place for them. But places like Hartford now, because of this growing availability for chaplaincies for women, this has really opened the door for Islamic leadership with females. So, you know, it's a work in progress, yeah.
This has been a wonderful, robust conversation. We're going to continue this conversation shortly. I think we're going to take a break right now, and then we're going to come back, and I'm going to ask our panel to come up and take their seats after the break. The break is how long? Till 7:45. We'll take a break till 7:45. Would you please help me in thanking our guest, Sister Leila?